episode and another season. My seasons, I base them on the seasons of my life. Season 3 definitely has some big changes. Being in Mexico, I have already learned a lot about myself. Things that I didn't know before, but more importantly, things that I knew, but I just ignored. And there are so many things that I need to talk about, that I need to tell you all. But today's topic is about the first time I really knew God. So basically, this is my testimony episode. Now, I always believed in God from a very young age, and you will be able to know my life story as I upload episodes for my memoir. It's a memoir about my life, but it heavily focuses on God's presence in my life and how many times He's helped me, saved me, and how curious I was. But it's mostly about the miracles and things that have happened in my life that are just unmistakably from God. And of course, my life is mingled in with that, obviously, but it's not really a memoir about my life. It's about my life and God in my life and doing the things that He has done to help me to today, to get me here, and to be able to tell you these things. So I want to go to the very first time that I absolutely, without a doubt, knew that God is real. And this happened around 1999. I remember it was after my youngest son was born. He was born in 1998, and he was just a baby. So I do recall that it was 1999. I was living in Little Rock, Arkansas, in a trailer park off of Dixon Road. I had been in an abusive relationship. Not a typical punch you in the face type of abusive relationship, physical, but there were some physical altercations in the relationship that still made it physical, but it wasn't one of the ones you see on TV or hear about where a woman goes to a battered woman's shelter. It wasn't like that, but it was a physically abusive relationship on occasion. But more than that, it was very verbally and emotionally abusive for many years. And by this time, I had already had 3 kids, and I didn't associate with friends anymore by choice. And I just kind of stayed in the home. At this time, I was not working at the time. Before I had been working a little part-time job, but I really didn't know what I was doing with my life, but I knew that I wasn't happy. And I loved my kids. I wanted to raise my kids the way that they should be raised. And I just didn't really have that opportunity or that environment in order to be able to do that properly and to give them the care and the guidance that they needed. But more than anything, they were in an unstable environment. They were seeing this person verbally abusing me and at times physically abusing me in subtle ways. So I wanted out of that relationship, but the thing is, I didn't know what to do. I didn't know where to go, like a lot of women who are in abusive relationships or toxic relationships of any kind, especially women with young children. They don't know where to go. They just kind of stay in the relationship for that reason. And mind you, I was not married at this time. That was another problem a big problem that I had as I grew up from a teenager into a young adult, with being in relationships and not being married. But that's going to be another episode for another day. So this was a very toxic relationship. I wanted out of this relationship, but I really didn't know how. I didn't know where to go or what to do about it. And I had 3 kids to take care of, and wherever I went, I needed to take them with me, obviously. So I was in a pretty difficult situation. So one day I was sitting in the living room in my trailer, and I was sitting on the couch and scrolling through channels on the TV looking for something to watch. And I came across a preacher, and I'm not sure why I stopped there. I had no interest in that whatsoever. I wasn't thinking about God at that time. I wasn't reading the Bible. I wasn't praying. I was in that period of my life where I just, I didn't think much about God, if ever, at that time. So it was strange that I would just stop on this channel with this preacher. And the first thing that he said when I stopped, like within a second or two, he pointed into the screen and said, "And I'm talking to you." And that got my attention. So I started listening to this sermon, and to this day I can't remember anything that he said in this sermon. But I do remember that my life changed after that, because immediately that day I felt, and in that moment, I felt overwhelmed with this just feeling of peace and calm and joy. And I wanted to experience it more. And I knew that I had never felt it before, but I knew that it was the love of Jesus Christ. I knew that it was the help that I had inadvertently been asking for without realizing that I was asking for it. God knew that I needed help. He knew I needed something to get me out of this situation. And so he started that day with me through the pastor on this sermon and drew me in as I was watching or flipping through channels. And from that very day, my life changed. Now, you remember the part where I said I wanted to be able to raise my kids the way that they should be raised. And of course, that means with a loving mother and a loving father, having both elements in the children's lives. But at that time, that wasn't too much of an option. But God found a way to make the best of the situation at the time. First of all, my personality just changed in a breath. I was happier. I wanted to just live in the moment and work for the future. I wanted to raise my kids on the Word of God. Suddenly, out of nowhere, I wanted to teach my kids about the Bible, the Word of God. I ordered this flashcard set for kids. It had over like 150 flashcards in it with like art and passages, and it was for kids to teach children. And we started doing that. Like I said, my youngest was 1 year old, and the others were 3 and 5. And so they were very young at this time. And I started homeschooling them, teaching them how to read, their colors, how to, to do things that like kindergartners or preschool. But most importantly, I was teaching them these flashcards. And also, of course, I was learning myself, because I knew really nothing about the Bible except the things that everybody knows. The story of Noah and the ark. I've watched the 10 Commandments when I was a kid, and I remember that story very well, of Moses and the Egyptians and freeing the slaves. And I knew about little things about Jesus and how he died on the cross. And so I knew the basic popular things that most people know, people that aren't even Christian. So I needed to know more. I wanted to know more. I wanted to absorb whatever I could. I remember trying to read the Bible at that time, but it was very difficult to understand because, like most people, I started in the beginning in the Old Testament. There's a lot in the Old Testament that is a little difficult to understand, and a lot of it is very drawn out and seemingly boring, especially when you start reading all the names and the lineage. So I got a little frustrated trying to understand the Bible, but I still tried. I would skip ahead into look for passages that I had read before or heard before, and just try to understand them, try to absorb them. But the important thing was I was trying, and I was also trying to teach my children. And so this went on for quite some time. But also like I said, I was happier. I was in this toxic relationship, but I found myself not being triggered by that person's attitude or the things that person would say to me. And I would just keep my cool and not say anything in return to anything that harmful that was said to me. And I found it very odd that I was able to do that, because I've always been a very outspoken person, very defensive, because I had, by the time I had kids, I had grown into this woman who had been used and abused by people her whole teenage and young adult life, that I needed these defense mechanisms. I didn't just shrivel up in a corner and cry, even though I did do that sometimes, but at the same time I was very combative and volatile, because I did not want to be treated that way. So it didn't help that in this already toxic relationship with this person that I was that way, because it just fueled the fire. But during this period, it was like God just took that off my shoulders. He took all the anger away. He took the heartbreak. He took the jealousy and the suspicions and things off of my heart, and made it to where I just really didn't care. But at the same time, I was able to live with this person and be peaceful toward him. And also during this time, I wanted to do more for other people. I didn't have much money, but I did manage to start donating. I think it was around $10 a month to a Christian children's fund, where you adopt a child from another country and you send money monthly to help support that child. And I remember they sent me a picture of him, and his name I remember was Momar. And I didn't have, like I said, much money, so this only lasted for a few months. But I still feel bad to this day that I couldn't continue to give to him. So the thing that I started doing at that time, like I said, I started donating to this Christian Children's Fund and helping a little boy in Africa. And I also remember that I used to love Metal Edge magazine. When I was a teenager, I loved that magazine. I was into rock music, heavy metal. I'm Gen X. I was an 80s and 90s kid. I loved the hair bands, the makeup. That was my thing. And then when Nirvana came along, I was into the grunge stuff. And so I remember in the Metal Edge magazine, in the back, I think it was Metal Edge magazine, because I used to buy every single one. Metal Edge, Hit Parader, all these magazines. And there were in the back a section for pen pals, and they were typically people who were in prison. And so I thought, I'm gonna start writing to some pen pals. So that Christmas, when Christmas rolled around, my family had asked me, what did I want for Christmas? They always ask the kids, and I was not a kid at that time, but I guess they still considered me little Jessie, because they still asked me for my Christmas list and my kids' Christmas list. And I'm like, okay. And the only thing that I asked for were writing materials, envelopes, stamps, just things that I could write, so I could write letters. Especially stamps, because even though stamps are not very expensive, back then they were a little expensive for me. So I started writing to a pen pal. I remember sending letters to a couple, but only one wrote me back, and probably because the first thing I started talking about in my letters was about Jesus. And I was trying to spread the gospel the only way I knew how. I didn't really understand ministry back then. I didn't really know what to do, what to say, but I felt like God told me what to say. He told me that it's okay, and I did, and I went into it with no fear, no feeling like, am I doing this right? Should I say this? Should I keep? I didn't have any of those thoughts. I just did it, and that's so very different from today, where I feel like every little thing I worry about, is this, am I doing this right, or should I say that, or should I not say this? So I started writing to this pen pal. This was a man in prison, and everything I talked about was about Jesus. And I don't remember the things that I said, and I really wish I had kept the letters that he sent to me, because we wrote back and forth for several months, and I don't even remember his name, but I just remember feeling like I hoped I helped this person. But we lost touch, and that was the end of that. But also, strangely enough, the relationship between me and the person that I was living with, I don't like to say ex, but the relationship started to get a little better. It was less chaotic, less volatile, because I was able to hold my tongue, to keep my emotions in check, when he couldn't. And we started listening to old Southern gospel music. And I remember that was when I was introduced to the McCammys. And I just loved that old Southern gospel style music. And that was all we listened to. We started reading the Bible. We started listening to gospel music. I don't remember us praying together, but the relationship did start to get a little better. But there was still a part of me that didn't want to be there. I wanted to I still wanted to leave, but I wanted to leave peacefully. But at the same time, I just felt like God wanted me there in the moment, so I just continued on with the relationship. But long story short, those feelings started to fade. I started becoming angry again and combative, and not wanting to be in the situation because the other person was not giving as much as I was. In fact, he started falling back much quicker than me and going back into his old habits and verbally abusing me emotionally. And I remember around this time, he even grabbed me by the throat and lifted me off my feet and slammed me against a wall. And so that did not last. And my love for Christ at that time, and wanting to spread the gospel and do whatever I could to live a godly life, it just dissipated. It left me in a breath, the same way that the feeling came into my life that day. So this period of my life lasted for about 1.5 years, I think. And it was gone. And I was just right back to being the depressed person that I had grown to just be so intimate with. This is just depression and anxiety, and living in this darkness. I went back to that. So I eventually left that person. I took my kids and I left, and I raised them myself. But that period in my life was the most unforgettable, not because of the people in my life, but because God came into my life and changed everything. And it was so miraculous to me. Like, how could someone like me, who just was depressed all the time and was in an abusive relationship, how could just like night and day, I just wake up and I'm suddenly this different person who knows that I have Jesus Christ in my life and that I don't have anything to worry about. And that I was able to so easily just put all of those feelings, all of those emotions away and not even think about them. I also had stopped cursing, using curse words at that time. there was so many things about my life. Oh, and another thing that I did that I forgot to mention this was I used to collect these Vampire the Masquerade gaming cards. I loved them. I didn't really play the game. I just liked to collect them because, you know, I liked vampires and stuff like that back then. And I had a lot of cards. I had a couple thousand of these cards. I even had some rares that when the card game was called Jihad, before they changed it to Vampire the Masquerade. And I had so much stuff that was related to vampires and Dungeons and Dragons and things like that. And I took those cards one day during this period, and I knew I just needed to get rid of them. And I cut them, every single one of them, one by one with scissors, and threw them in the trash. I had the rock music and the rock bands, and that's why I had a Metal Edge magazine at that time, was because I was still reading that magazine at that point. But then when I went to go and get rid of all this stuff, all this evil, toxic stuff that was in my life, I had run across that magazine, and that's when I got the idea to write pen pals in the back of the magazine about Jesus. So that is the feeling that I have been seeking my entire life ever since about 1999. There have been many times since then that I've felt the presence of the Lord in my life. Just recently when I prayed, and I was in a spiritual drought, and He changed everything, and I'm still in that moment right now where I'm not worried about things. I'm not worried about finances. I'm not worried about if our studio is going to get built. I'm not worried about health stuff. I'm just, there's a lot of other things that I would generally worry about all the time, and I don't worry. And I feel very happy and peaceful right now. I've been changing my life here in this tiny studio, and that's why it is also season 3, because there are so many things that I'm changing, things about myself that have always been there, but I never brought them out into the open. And because I've just been covered by this darkness my whole life. So that moment in time back in 1999, I desperately seek that feeling that I felt. And I know that I'm going to feel it again, maybe even better. And I just keep fighting. I keep going toward the goals that I feel that God has for my life. And I think that one of those things, one of the reasons why He brought me here was to humble me. And I've been wondering, why am I here? Why am I here in this place where the electricity goes out all the time, where there's no gas lines, where the water situation is difficult? And I've been complaining about these things. And He humbled me. Just recently, I started to realize, why am I complaining? Why do I get so upset when these things happen, or when these troubles come so often? Because I have so much more than so many people. I have a 1-room studio with a bathroom and a shower and a bed, and I have something to cook on. I have dishes. I have bananas on the counter. I have a closet behind me. I have pictures on the wall. I have so many things that so many people would love to have. And I have nothing to complain about. And now I'm finally starting to realize one of the probably many reasons why I'm here. And that is one of them. Because I needed to understand more than I thought I did, that living in the United States in my comfort zone, where everything was handed to me. Now, of course, I'm not saying life is easy there and you go there and you just live simply and you don't have to do anything. That's not what I mean. What I mean is that my life in particular was so easy. I didn't have to get up and go to work at a job every day. I did whatever I wanted, whenever I wanted to. And at the time, I was living off of the money from my book sales in 2012 and 2013. And I didn't have to worry about money. I bought things that I could buy. I didn't have to worry about where am I going to get the money to buy this thing that I need, like my heating and air unit, for instance, or how am I going to afford groceries. I didn't have to worry about any of that. I could go and just drink from the faucet whenever I wanted for water. I did not have to worry about the electricity going off or being stuck without air conditioning. I had heat in the winter. Anything that I needed, there was somebody that could do it, and I could pay for them to come and fix it or build it or take it away. Here, life is hard, but it's not nearly as hard as some people around the world. And I have nothing to complain about. So I'm finally starting to realize why I'm here. And it's just, it's like something is just opening up. The sky is opening and I'm starting to see clearly for the first time in almost 2 years. And I'm starting to realize that my life is on a track that I've always wanted it to be on. I secretly desired it. I wanted it when I was a little girl. And I'm going to talk about that in another video, another episode. So that is my testimony. That was when I first knew God. And I just want you, whoever is watching this, to know that He is real. One day, I pray that you will find Him and that feeling that I felt, so you can know that no matter what anybody says or what anybody thinks or believes or tries to convince you of, that He is absolutely real. And that if anything, if you're going to pursue anything in your life, you should pursue God first. So, this is season 3, folks. Things are different. Things are looking up. And I'm just ready to share everything with you all. Until next time, God bless.